Soldier's Creed. I am a member of Atlas. I serve Atlas and their clients. I will always place Atlas's interest first. I will not be defeated. I will never be outworked, outclassed, or outgunned. I stand ready to eliminate the enemies of Atlas. I am Atlas. This was the Soldier's Creed, the oath of loyalty taken by the military contractors of the Atlas Corporation. That a soldier would swear to place their life in the service of not a nation or an ideal, but for an employer, speaks to the influence, reach, and power that corporation once held. Atlas was the largest private military corporation and the single largest private organization humanity had ever seen. Like the legendary giant of its namesake, Atlas sought to hold up the world, irrevocably shaping the events of the mid-20th century. Its interests steered the course of international research. Its stock value drove the world economy. Its products reshaped daily life. In technological and scientific innovation, it was unequaled, spearheading the single largest revolution in transport since the discovery of flight. In the field of biological engineering, it achieved creations that were as seemingly impossible as they were horrifying. But above all, its military breakthroughs would usher in a shift in the conduct of warfare, as awe-inspiring as the day tanks first rolled over the trenches of the Somme. At its peak, Atlas was a household name the world over. It grew in power and influence to a degree unimaginable for a private corporation, challenging nation-states and exerting influence through the highest levels of international diplomacy. It was this company, the self-styled superpower for hire, that would be a necessary innovator, then savior, and finally, the greatest enemy of the modern world. Founded in 2035 by Jonathan Irons, a former soldier of the United States Army, Atlas began its existence as a small collective of bioengineering firms and their associated security branch. Throughout the 2030s, with a focus on research that prioritized practical application, Atlas expanded its operations to incorporate the most cutting-edge labs from across the world, planting itself at the forefront of technological development. In just 10 years, the Atlas Corporation had become known as a driving force of modern technology, with breakthroughs in bioengineering, hover transport systems, medical technology, and 3D printing on a mass scale. Its industrial output rivaled that of some small nations, with an advanced manufacturing chain that produced infrastructure and technology of the highest quality. The key to Atlas's unmatched success was its investment in technological research. The combination of their bioengineering labs with an advanced heavy industry base allowed them to make simultaneous breakthroughs across a range of fields. Their armored exoskeletons became a mainstay of every modern military across the world, whilst their hovering tanks and motorcycles revolutionized the nature of mobile warfare. With their mastery of large-scale 3D printing, upgrading factory lines became as simple as updating software, and so Atlas was able to capitalize on each breakthrough without a loss of output. They developed the most advanced range of military and civilian hardware in the world, with a monopolized supply chain that was virtually self-sustaining. But its profits were funneled into the corporation's immense security force, which was eventually transformed into an integrated and independent private military. In barely 15 years, Atlas had become the largest military contractor in the world, able to operate at a level not seen in the private sector since the height of the British East India Company. Thanks to the government connections of Irons, Atlas also became the primary supplier of the United States Armed Forces, providing the majority of its military hardware and the core of its logistical chain. Meanwhile, their own forces matched the world's greatest nations in scale and effectiveness, and in some areas, even surpassed them. Thanks to these vast capabilities, Atlas's private military began to operate like any national armed force, taking a combined arms approach to war that covered every aspect of any military theatre. From infantry to heavy armor, air cover, and artillery, Atlas could field a complete combat force without relying on the support of any nation. They would routinely headhunt soldiers from national armies, able to offer them far more pay and often better equipment for the same deployment. They had the resources to maintain at least one fleet of warships based around a fully sized aircraft carrier, and they even operated an orbital base capable of launching drop pods directly into active combat zones.
So it sounds like ODSTs.
This massive growth and technological edge allowed Atlas to extend its government contracts worldwide, and its private military forces were deployed to conflict across the planet. In particular, Atlas was lauded for rebuilding the war-torn city of Baghdad in 2047, doing more in 5 years to restore the ancient capital than its local government had done in 50. In 2053, with the outbreak of open war on the Korean peninsula, Atlas joined United Nations forces in lifting the siege on the South Korean capital of Seoul. Atlas Special Forces were key in securing several South Korean VIPs, as well as providing the launch systems for the US Marine Corps' drop pod assault that saw the city liberated. These major successes drove Atlas through the 2050s to shift its focus from small defense contracts to direct, extended military campaigns. Its part in resolving the conflict on the Korean peninsula was only the beginning of its worldwide interventionism, and in 2055, its resources were devoted to fighting the international terrorist organization, the KVA. An anti-Western, anti-technology extremist group, the KVA's string of political assassinations and mass terrorism grew to become a threat capable of destabilizing entire nations. Its attempted killing of the Nigerian Prime Minister in 2055 was only barely prevented by Atlas security forces, but later that very year, the group would succeed in inducing meltdowns in nuclear power stations across the world. This was an international catastrophe, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands and rendering entire cities and industrial centers uninhabitable. After this disaster, Atlas remained one of the few organizations that could still effectively operate worldwide. The disaster marked the opening of 4 years of armed operations against the KVA undertaken by Atlas, as well as a widespread humanitarian relief effort. Its vast wealth and international production sites became ever more vital to the most heavily affected regions, forming the core of recovery and security in nations that threatened to tumble into anarchy. As the years passed, the sight of Atlas engineers and security operatives became more and more common, eclipsing government officials and international charities. Amidst the overcrowded cities and relief camps, Atlas was the preeminent group a person could turn to for security, support, and the chance of a future. By the turn of the decade, Atlas had successfully cut the head from the KVA's command structure, capturing its chief lieutenant in the ruins of Detroit and successfully tracking down its founder, Joseph Hades Chikaic, to the Greek island of Santorini. After a brief and bloody conflict with an Atlas Special Operations team, the man who had orchestrated the suffering of the last 5 years lay dead. But in his final moments, he revealed the truth that would overturn the world one last time.
How?
With his last words and the passing of a data chip, Hades revealed
Passing
that
the data
Atlas's
chip mean?
CEO,
How in the heck
Jonathan
to get the
Ives,
data
knew
chip?
about the worldwide nuclear reactor attacks and had intentionally allowed them to
That
happen.
was never explained.
With governments thrown into disarray, the space had been cleared for Atlas to grow even larger and more powerful, all whilst parading as the world's savior. After confronting Irons himself in the city of New Baghdad, which at this point was entirely under the company's control, those same Atlas soldiers escaped with the data chip, intending to reveal his involvement to the international community. But Irons had no intention of hiding his goals any longer. Over the 5 years of struggle and catastrophe, the world had come to rely on Atlas for nearly every aspect of its existence. For these successes, it was hailed the world over as the savior of nations.
Hoorah.
In recognition of its defeat of the KVA, Irons was formally granted a seat on the United Nations Security Council.
Hoorah.
It was during this ceremony that he showed his true colors, announcing his company's formal succession from the UN and declaring war on the United States.
get
The
in.
first city to feel the wrath of Atlas was San Francisco, where the US Navy's Third Fleet was stationed. Atlas operatives succeeded in destroying the Golden Gate Bridge as the fleet maneuvered under it, crippling its aircraft carrier and sending the survivors into disarray. This preemptive strike opened the way for Atlas's own carrier fleet to enter the San Francisco Bay, deploying a series of assault ships carrying stockpiles of Manticore missiles. These missiles, the true product of Atlas's decades of bioengineering efforts, carried a viral payload designed to kill anyone not on Atlas's database of personnel. A counterattack from Atlas deserters and the US Sentinel Task Force narrowly managed to destroy these ships, which were in the process of targeting US bases across the West Coast to open the way for a full invasion. Though the assault on San Francisco failed, it was only the opening blow, and the next year would see conflict break out worldwide. Atlas sites became fortified enclaves, striking out at their host nations or pulling them into long, bloody sieges. In distant stretches of the world, elite forces fought to intercept shipments of Manticore missiles and their viral payloads before they could be used to annihilate armies wholesale. In 2061, an attempt by the United States to kill Jonathan Irons in New Baghdad ended in disaster, with the bioengineered virus wiping out the invading Sentinel units to the last soldier. The only survivors, those very same Atlas deserters who killed Hades, discovered Irons' betrayal, and thwarted the assault at San Francisco, were captured and placed inside a prisoner of war camp. In response to this threat on his life, Irons prepared to launch long-range Manticore missiles at military bases all across the globe, decimating the UN's remaining forces and securing Atlas as the only superpower on Earth left standing. In a desperate gambit, the final 3 Atlas deserters broke free from their prison and stole suits of exo armor, fighting through the Atlas forces in an attempt to reach the launch control site. With just moments left, the deserters succeeded in aborting the missile launch and killed Irons himself, finally putting an end to his long scheme of international terrorism. Though their CEO has been killed, remnants of Atlas persist across the globe. Between the fallout of the 2055 nuclear disasters, the breakdown of international cooperation, and the war with Atlas itself, many nations lack the ability to strike back against the technologically superior and heavily entrenched corporation. Others see the benefits Atlas had brought, and despite everything, continue to throw their weight behind the company. Some governments have fallen entirely, leaving Atlas the only organization still able to operate in their former borders. In those war-torn cities and embattled regions, it can be said that Irons' dream of a corporate technocracy has finally come to pass.
The Templin Institute investigates the nations, factions, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive awards.